My boss slid a check across his desk with 3 commas in it and said the only thing he needed from me was a wedding ring and a convincing smile. I want to be clear that I did not see this coming on a random Tuesday morning when all I'd asked for was a raise. I'm Ivy Marsh, 26, executive assistant to Nathan Cole, CEO of Cole Structural, a mid-sized architecture and engineering firm in Denver that his grandfather built from nothing in 1978. I'd worked for Nathan for 3 years, which meant I knew his coffee order, his allergy to almonds, the exact tone of his voice that meant a client call was about to go badly, and absolutely nothing about his personal life because Nathan Cole did not have one. He had spreadsheets. He had a corner office with a view of the mountains he never looked at. He had a jaw that could cut glass and a habit of forgetting to eat lunch that I'd stopped trying to fix around here too. That Tuesday, he called me into his office at 8:47 in the morning, which was early even for him, and told his door to close itself behind me by simply staring at it until I did it manually. "Sit down, Ivy," he said. "That's never good," I said, sitting. "It's not bad. It's complicated. Those are the same thing wearing different shoes." He almost smiled. Almost. Nathan's almost smiles were a currency I'd learned to collect without admitting I was collecting them. "My grandfather's will," he said, "has a clause I did not read carefully enough 11 years ago when he died and I was 24 and grieving and signed whatever my family's lawyer put in front of me. Okay. The controlling shares of this company transfer to me outright on my 35th birthday." He paused. "Provided I am married at the time of transfer." I blinked. "Provided you're what?" "Married," he said, like the word itself was an inconvenience he'd have preferred to itemize elsewhere. "My grandfather believed a man who built something should have a family to build it for. If I'm not married by then, controlling interest passes to my cousin Marcus." I knew Marcus. Everyone at Cole Structural knew Marcus, the way you know a storm system approaching from the west. Marcus had tried twice to merge the firm into a national conglomerate that would have laid off half the office and slapped a generic logo on 40 years of my boss's grandfather's work. "When's your birthday?" I asked, already dreading the answer. 3 weeks from Saturday." I sat back. "Nathan, you don't have a girlfriend. You don't have time for a girlfriend. You once scheduled a dentist appointment during your own birthday dinner because you forgot it was your birthday. I'm aware of my limitations." He opened his desk drawer and took out a check. He set it on the desk between us and turned it so I could read the number. $10,000. My name already filled in. "I need a wife," he said. "On paper. A courthouse marriage, a real marriage certificate, because the estate attorney will check, and believe me, my cousin will have someone checking. It needs to last through the transfer date and probably a respectable interval after, so it doesn't look like exactly what it is. I will pay for an annulment lawyer when it's over. I will pay you $10,000 now and another 10 when it's done. You would keep your job, your title, your office. Nothing changes except a ring and a signature." I looked at the check. I looked at him. "You're asking your assistant to marry you for money." "I'm asking the one person in my life I trust not to want anything from me she isn't asking for out loud," he said. "That's rarer than you'd think, in my position. That landed somewhere I didn't examine closely at the time. Why not date someone? Actually date someone? Fast track it? Because actual dating requires actual feelings, which take time I don't have and which I am, by every account including my own therapist's, bad at producing on command." He said this so plainly it almost hurt to hear. "This is a business transaction. I need someone competent, discreet, and immune to my particular brand of nonsense. You've spent 3 years being all three. That's either the most flattering or the most insulting job offer I've ever gotten. I'm aware it could be read either way. I should have said no. A smarter version of me, a version who hadn't spent 3 years quietly cataloging the way Nathan rubbed the back of his neck when he was worried, or the way he'd once driven across town at 11 at night to bring me soup when I had the flu and then stood awkwardly in my doorway like delivering soup was a foreign diplomatic maneuver. That version of me would have said no immediately and gone back to her desk. Instead I said, I have conditions. Nathan's eyebrows went up slightly. Of course you do. 1. This is a legal document, not a real marriage, which means we need actual rules. Separate finances beyond the agreed payment. Separate bedrooms, obviously, wherever we're supposedly living. Obviously. 2. If your family asks questions, we have a consistent story. I am not getting caught improvising in front of your grandmother's estate attorney. There is no story to improvise. My grandmother passed as well. It's my mother who will ask questions, and she asks them like she's cross-examining a witness. Then we prepare for cross-examination. 3. I hesitated because this one mattered more than I wanted it to. If either of us wants out before the deadline for any reason, we're honest about it immediately. No games. Nathan looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look he usually reserved for blueprints that didn't quite add up. Agreed, he said. Also, I should mention, my mother is hosting a dinner Friday. She already thinks I've been dating someone. I may have implied it to get her to stop setting me up with her book club's daughters. You implied a girlfriend into existence before you had one lined up? I'm efficient, he said, entirely without irony. Friday, I repeated. That's 2 days from now. I'm aware of the calendar, Ivy. What does your mother think this mystery woman's name is? Nathan had the decency to look uncomfortable for the first time in the entire conversation. I may have said Ivy. I stared at him. You used my actual name before you asked me anything. Panicked. She asked directly. You were the only name available to my brain at that particular moment. That is deeply telling, and I am choosing not to examine it, I said, and I meant it mostly for about 4 more days. We went to the courthouse the following Thursday morning before work. Both of us in our regular office clothes because a wedding dress felt like a lie too big even for a lie this big. The clerk was a bored woman in her 50s who had clearly seen every version of Desperate before us and didn't blink twice. Rings? She asked. Nathan produced 2 plain bands from his coat pocket, the kind you buy in 20 minutes at a jewelry counter when you're trying not to draw attention to yourself. He slid mine onto my finger with hands that were, I noticed, not entirely steady, which surprised me more than the wedding itself. You're nervous, I said quietly while the clerk shuffled paperwork. I'm marrying my assistant in a strip mall courthouse to keep a company my grandfather built out of my cousin's hands, Nathan said. I think nervous is the reasonable response. For the record, I said, I've never been married before. I'd hoped for slightly more romance. Something moved across his face. Quick. Gone before I could name it. For the record, he said, so had I. We signed. The clerk stamped something. Took 4 minutes. I walked out of the Denver County Clerk's office a married woman, holding hands with my boss for the benefit of a security camera neither of us acknowledged, and feeling considerably more married than 4 minutes should have made anyone feel. Friday dinner arrived faster than either of us wanted. Nathan picked me up from my apartment at 6, driving us to his mother's house in Cherry Creek, a place with the kind of manicured lawn that made a statement about the family's patience for imperfection. Rules, he said in the car. My mother's name is Patricia. She will ask how we met. The truth, technically, is fine. You're my assistant. We've worked together 3 years. And how we fell for each other. Nathan's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. I hadn't gotten that far. That's the first question any mother asks. Then we improvise honestly, he said. Tell her something true. It's easier to remember and harder to catch. Something true, I repeated. Like what? He was quiet for a second too long. Like the fact that you're the only person who's ever told me no and meant it kindly. I didn't have a response ready for that, which was unusual for me, and we arrived at his mother's driveway before I found one. Patricia Cole opened the door before we knocked, which meant she'd been watching from the window, which told me everything I needed to know about the evening ahead. She was elegant in the specific way of women who'd spent decades deciding exactly how much of themselves to show a room. Nathan, she said, kissing his cheek, then turning her full attention to me with an expression that assessed my shoes, my dress, and probably my intentions in under 2 seconds. And you must be Ivy. Finally. Mrs. Cole, I said. Thank you for having me. Patricia, please. Her smile was warm and entirely unconvinced. Come in. Dinner's almost ready. Nathan, your cousin's here. Nathan went very still beside me. Marcus is here? He heard you were bringing someone, Patricia said, already walking toward the kitchen. He wanted to meet her. I looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at me. He knows about the will, I whispered. He knows everything about the will, Nathan whispered back. He's the reason the will matters. Marcus Cole was in the living room with a glass of wine he was holding like a prop, tall, handsome in the rehearsed way of a man who'd practiced his own reflection, and watching us walk in with the polite, sharpened attention of someone waiting for a mistake. Nathan, Marcus said. And the famous Ivy. I was starting to think you'd invented her. She's very real, Nathan said, and put his hand at the small of my back, warm and certain, and I had to remind myself it was choreography. How long have you two been together? Marcus asked, eyes flicking between us. A while, Nathan said. How long is a while? I stepped in before Nathan's vague answer could turn into a crack in the story. Long enough that I've learned to bring my own snacks to his meetings because he forgets to eat, I said, which is either romantic or a public health concern, depending who you ask. Marcus laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. And where was the wedding? I heard there was one. Quietly, Patricia's head turned sharply from the kitchen doorway. Wedding? The room went very quiet. Nathan's hand found mine. We got married Thursday, he said. Courthouse. We didn't want a production. Patricia set down the serving spoon she'd been holding. You got married, she said slowly, and didn't tell your mother. I'm telling you now, Nathan said. Dinner. In front of Marcus. I didn't plan the timing, Nathan said, which was, I noted, technically true. Patricia's eyes moved to me with an intensity that made me grateful I'd rehearsed a version of calm in the car. How long have you two actually been seeing each other? Ivy? The truth. I thought about my 3 conditions. Honesty where it counted. I thought about the truth that actually mattered, the one underneath the paperwork. 3 years I've worked for him, I said carefully. Whatever this is between us, it didn't start Thursday. It started somewhere in those 3 years, quietly, in ways neither of us said out loud until we had to. It wasn't a lie. It also wasn't entirely something I'd let myself think before that exact moment. And saying it out loud in front of his mother felt like admitting something to myself I hadn't scheduled time for. Patricia studied me for a long moment. Something in her posture eased. Fractionally. Well, she said. At least you didn't lie about loving him for show. I've met women who would have. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Congratulations, he said, in a voice that suggested the opposite. I'm sure the timing, so close to the transfer date, is entirely coincidental. Entirely, Nathan said, meeting his cousin's eyes without blinking. Dinner continued in the careful choreography of a family performing normalcy for an audience of one uninvited skeptic. Patricia asked about our first date. Nathan and I looked at each other for half a second too long before I said, coffee, near the office. He got my order wrong on purpose, so I'd have to correct him. I found out later it was deliberate. It was not deliberate, Nathan said. It was extremely deliberate, I said. You've never once gotten my order wrong by accident in 3 years. That earned a real laugh from Patricia, the first one, and something shifted in her face like a door opening a few inches. Marcus watched us with the expression of a man doing arithmetic he didn't like the answer to. After dinner, on the porch, while Nathan helped his mother with dishes she insisted on doing herself, Marcus found me alone with 2 glasses of wine, one of which he handed me without asking if I wanted it. You're good, he said. I'll give you that. Excuse me? Whatever you two are doing. He sipped his wine, watching me over the rim. I don't know the details. I don't need to. I know my cousin, and I know he doesn't fall in love on a schedule that happens to line up with a shareholder deadline. People fall in love on all kinds of schedules, I said. Some of them are just inconvenient. Sure. Marcus smiled, and it was not a kind smile. I just want you to know whatever he's paying you, I'd pay double to know the truth. Purely for legal curiosity. My stomach dropped, but I kept my face still. 3 years of managing Nathan's worst days having taught me exactly how to do that. That's an interesting thing to say to your cousin's wife. It's an interesting marriage, Marcus said. 3 weeks before a 10-figure transfer of controlling interest. I'm sure the estate attorney will find it just as interesting when he does his due diligence. Due diligence on a legal marriage, I said, should find exactly what it is. Legal. Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly, recalibrating. He hadn't expected me to hold ground, and something about my not flinching seemed to unsettle him more than an argument would have. We'll see, he said, and walked back inside. I stood on the porch for a moment with my heart going faster than I wanted it to. Nathan came out a minute later, drying his hands on a dish towel, and took one look at my face. What did he say to you? He offered to pay me to admit this is fake. Nathan's jaw tightened. What did you tell him? I told him it's legal, which it is. I looked at him. He's going to dig, Nathan. He's going to have someone dig into everything. Bank records, our apartment situation, whether we actually live together. Nathan was quiet for a moment, and something crossed his face that looked almost like fear, which I hadn't seen on him before, not once in 3 years, not through client crises or budget disasters or the anniversary of his grandfather's death that he pretended wasn't difficult every single year. Then you'd need to actually move in, he said slowly. If we want this to survive scrutiny, I have a guest room. It's not asking you to. I know what you're asking, I said. I'm saying yes before you finish being awkward about it. That almost smile again. You're very accommodating for someone getting paid $10,000. I'm very accommodating for someone who doesn't want to watch Marcus dismantle 40 years of your grandfather's work over a technicality, I said, and meant every word of it, and didn't examine too closely why the thought of protecting Nathan's company had started to feel like protecting something of my own. I moved into Nathan's condo the following Monday with 2 suitcases and a box of books, into the guest room down the hall from his, which had a view of the same mountains he never looked at from the office. The first week was almost comically formal. We passed each other in the kitchen like strangers negotiating a truce. He left sticky notes about grocery items. I left sticky notes correcting his spelling on the sticky notes. Neither of us mentioned that we were, on paper, married, sleeping 40 feet apart, performing a partnership that was starting to develop its own accidental gravity. It was the second week that things started to crack open in ways I hadn't planned for. I found him at 1 a.m. on a Wednesday, sitting at the kitchen island with the lights off except for his laptop screen, staring at a spreadsheet with the particular blankness of a man who'd stopped seeing the numbers an hour ago. You should be asleep, I said. So should you. I heard you moving around and got worried you were rearranging the furniture out of stress again. I sat across from him. What's wrong? He rubbed the back of his neck, the tell I'd learned 3 years ago. Marcus's lawyer sent a formal request for our financial records. Joint accounts, lease agreements, anything that establishes cohabitation and shared life. He's building a challenge to file the day after my birthday. We have joint accounts now. We do live together. For 11 days, Nathan said. A good lawyer will make 11 days sound exactly like what it is. I looked at him in the dim light, the exhaustion sitting on him in a way I hadn't seen since the 6 months after his grandfather's funeral. Back when I was new and didn't know yet that his silences meant something and his overworking meant something else. Can I ask you something? I said. Always. Why does this company matter so much to you? Not the legal answer. The real one. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee mug in slow circles on the counter. My grandfather built this from a drafting table in his garage, he said finally. He used to bring me to job sites when I was 7, 8 years old, and let me hold the blueprints like I was doing something important. He died thinking I was the only person who'd protect what he built the way he'd have wanted it protected. Marcus would sell it to the highest bidder in a year. He's already got buyers lined up, I've heard. This isn't about money for me. It's about not being the generation that let it go. That's not a legal answer, I said quietly. That's a real one. You asked for real. I reached across the counter, an instinct more than a decision, and put my hand over his. He went still, the way he had at the courthouse, and looked at our hands like he was recalculating something. We're going to win this, I said. Not because of paperwork. Because Marcus doesn't understand what he's up against. He thinks this is a transaction. He doesn't know I've spent 3 years learning exactly how stubborn you are. Something in Nathan's face shifted, softened, in a way I hadn't seen directed at me before. Ivy, he said. Yeah. Thank you for saying yes. 3 weeks ago. In my office. You didn't have to. I know, I said. I did it anyway. Why? I could have given him the safe answer. The money, the job security, the loyalty of 3 years. Instead I said, because when you asked, you looked like a man who genuinely thought there was no one who'd help him without wanting something back. And I wanted to be the person who proved you wrong. His hand turned under mine, palm to palm, fingers threading through slowly like he was testing whether I'd pull away. I didn't. That's a dangerous thing to admit to your fake husband, he said quietly. Is it fake, though? I asked before I could stop myself. The marriage is legal. The house is real. The worry keeping you up at 1 in the morning is real. I don't know what part of this you'd call fake anymore. Nathan looked at me for a long moment in the kitchen light, and I watched him decide something, the way I'd watched him decide 100 business calls over 3 years, except this decision moved slower and cost him more. I don't know either, he said. I've been trying to figure out since the courthouse which parts I'm performing and which parts I'm not. And the answer keeps getting harder to find. And tonight, he said, watching you get angry on my behalf at a dinner table, defending a marriage that started as a spreadsheet solution, I stopped being able to tell the difference at all. I should have said something clever. I didn't. I leaned across the kitchen island instead, and he met me halfway, and the kiss was slow and careful and entirely unrehearsed, nothing like the choreography we'd built for his mother's benefit. When we pulled back, we were both breathing differently. That wasn't in the contract, I said. No, Nathan said. It wasn't. We didn't discuss it the next morning. Both of us moving around the kitchen with the particular carefulness of two people who'd changed something and weren't ready to name it out loud in daylight. But something had shifted, a warmth that followed us to the office, that sat in the way he brought me coffee unprompted, in the way I started leaving later just to walk out with him. Marcus's challenge came exactly as promised, filed the Monday after Nathan's birthday, requesting an emergency hearing to contest the validity of the marriage before the estate transfer could finalize. The hearing was set for the following Friday, in front of the estate attorney and, unexpectedly, a family court mediator Marcus had brought in to make things look procedurally serious. We sat across a conference table from Marcus and his lawyer, a sharp woman in her 40s who opened with financial records, our joint lease, our joint bank account, all 11 days' worth, now stretched into 6 weeks' worth, which helped, but she zeroed in fast on the timeline. The marriage occurred 4 days before Mr. Cole learned of his cousin's plans to challenge the estate transfer. She said, sliding a printed timeline across the table. That is not the timeline of an established relationship. That is the timeline of a legal maneuver. Objection to characterization, Nathan's attorney said, though we weren't technically in a courtroom, and the estate attorney overseeing the meeting waved a tired hand for everyone to continue. Marcus's lawyer turned to me directly. Miss Marsh. How long were you and Mr. Cole romantically involved before the wedding? I felt Nathan tense beside me. I thought about my conditions. Honesty where it counted. I've worked for Nathan for 3 years, I said. I fell for him somewhere in that time, quietly, the way you do when you're watching someone every day and telling yourself it's just admiration for how hard they work. I never said anything because he's my boss, and I didn't think it was appropriate, and I genuinely believed nothing would ever happen between us. And yet you married him within days of a financial deadline, the lawyer pressed. Yes, I said, because he came to me with something that terrified him, losing the one thing his grandfather left him, and instead of hiding that fear, he told me the truth and asked for help. I said yes because I've never in 3 years seen him ask anyone for anything. That's not evidence of a scheme. That's evidence of a man who doesn't ask unless it matters. The room was quiet. Marcus's expression flickered, something uncertain moving behind his composure. That's a lovely story, his lawyer said. But feelings aren't documentation. No, I agreed. But this is. I reached into my bag and set down a folder I'd prepared the night before. 6 weeks of text messages between Nathan and me. Not staged. Not curated for this hearing. Just the actual accumulated evidence of two people slowly becoming something neither of us had planned. Grocery list arguments. Him asking if I'd eaten. Me sending him a photo of the mountains from the guest room window with the caption, "You should actually look at these sometime." 3 a.m. conversations about his grandfather. None of it proved a wedding date. All of it proved a marriage in the only way that actually mattered. The estate attorney read through several pages in silence, then looked up at Marcus. I've seen enough sham marriage challenges to know what desperation looks like on paper, he said. This isn't it. Mr. Cole meets the terms of the will. The transfer proceeds as scheduled. Marcus stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. This is absurd. Anyone can fake a few months of text messages. You're welcome to hire a forensic analyst, Nathan's attorney said mildly, at your own expense. I suspect you'll find the timestamps considerably less convenient for your case than you're hoping. Marcus looked at me, then at Nathan, something cold and defeated moving across his face. Congratulations, he said again, the same word from dinner, meaning the opposite again, and walked out without shaking anyone's hand. We sat in the parking garage afterward for a long time before either of us started the car. You didn't have to say all that, Nathan said quietly. About falling for me quietly. Over 3 years. I know, I said. Was it true? I looked at him, at the version of him that had existed in my head for 3 years, tired and brilliant and terrified of asking anyone for anything, and the version sitting next to me now, less guarded than I'd ever seen him, waiting for my answer like it mattered more than the hearing we just walked out of. Every word, I said. I just never planned on saying it out loud in front of an estate attorney. Nathan laughed, short and surprised, and reached over and took my hand the way he had that night in the kitchen. Except this time there was no audience, no performance requirement, nothing but the two of us in a parking garage after successfully protecting 40 years of his grandfather's legacy. I want to ask you something, he said, and I need you to know it has nothing to do with the will or the company or the $10,000 I still owe you. Okay. I want to actually be married to you. Not the paperwork version. The real one. Dates that aren't strategic. A wedding you'd actually want whenever you want it, even though technically we've already done the courthouse version twice as hard as anyone should have to. I felt my throat tighten in a way I hadn't expected. You're asking your fake wife to become your real wife. I'm asking my wife, he said, correcting himself carefully because somewhere in 6 weeks of pretending, I stopped noticing where the pretending ended. That's either the most romantic or the strangest proposal I've ever heard, I said. Given how we started, Nathan said, I think strange is our baseline. Then yes, I said, for the record, since apparently I like getting things on the record with you. He kissed me again in that parking garage, slower this time, no kitchen counter between us, No reason left to call it anything but exactly what it was. The company transfer finalized without incident 3 weeks later. Patricia hosted a real celebration dinner, minus one uninvited cousin, and toasted to, in her words, the only marriage she'd ever seen start backward and land exactly right side up. Marcus sold his shares in a smaller family business he'd been neglecting and stopped returning calls from anyone at Cole Structural, which suited everyone fine. We had a real wedding the following spring, small. In the mountains. Nathan finally started noticing from every window in his life. Not just the office. I wore an actual dress this time. He didn't forget to eat at his own celebration. Patricia cried during the toast and blamed the wind. People at the office still ask, sometimes, how it started, and I tell them the true version now, the one I couldn't say out loud that first Tuesday morning. That my boss offered me $10,000 to pretend we were married, and somewhere in the pretending, in courthouse paperwork and stolen kitchen conversations and one very tense hearing, we stopped needing the pretending at all. He still owes me the second $10,000, technically. I told him I'd take it in mountain views instead, paid out slowly, for the rest of our lives. He said that was a terrible business decision. I told him it was the best one I ever made. What would you have done if your boss offered you $10,000 to pretend you were married? Would you have said yes, or run the other way? Tell me in the comments. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.